So thank you for joining us for tonight's program. My name is Liz Schultz, and I'm the Executive Director of the Oberlin Heritage Center. We are a local historical society here in Oberlin, Ohio. And if this is your first program in a while, our mission is to preserve and share Oberlin's unique heritage and to make our community a better place to live, learn, work, and visit. If you are local, we are located behind the post office or Lorenzo's, right in the middle of that block. We are open right now. We do have a few safety protocols, but you can sign up for tours indoors, and we also have our neighborhood history walks. And for the latest news, please do sign up for our newsletter or become a member, and you'll get our monthly e-Gazette newsletter too. So just a few tips for using Zoom. This is a webinar format. So if you're on a computer, usually in the upper right-hand corner, you can see some options for adjusting how you are viewing the screen here. On your phones, you might have to swipe left or right, or for other devices. Because it is a webinar, you won't be seeing or hearing other attendees. This is going to be focused on our presenter here today. And if you want to send us messages, you can do that through the chat box. They will only come to the panelists here. And then also at the end of the program, we will have time for Q&A, questions and answers. So if you are on your computer, just move your mouse to the bottom of your screen and you should get an option for Q&A, and you can type your questions in there. We'll try to get to everyone's questions, but depending on the time, we might have to prioritize some things, but we'll try to get to you all today. If you have technical problems, my cell phone number is up there, so as soon as I'm done speaking, feel free to reach out to me and I'll try to talk you through some possible solutions. That is 440-935-3072. After this program, we will be emailing you a link to a feedback form. We try to get feedback after all of our programs, not only to hear about what you thought about this program so we can share feedback with Dr. Schmiel, but also so we get ideas for future programs as well. So after I'm finished, I will also put that in the chat box. I'm sorry, I will put my phone number in the chat box. You'll be receiving the feedback form via email. Just one quick plug that our annual meeting is next week on Wednesday in the evening. It's free, it's an hour, and we'll have updates about what we've been up to, our elections, community awards, and also a special update from a new historical society that recently formed right here in Oberlin, the Wilson Bruce Evans Home Historical Society. So please do come. Everyone is welcome to attend our annual meeting, but it's especially important for members to attend. We do have some items to vote on, and your opinion is important. So please plan to come to that next week. And then finally, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, who has presented several excellent programs with the Heritage Center in the past. Gene Schmiel is a retired U.S. Department of State Foreign Service officer. He was an assistant professor of history at St. Francis University in Pennsylvania and has taught at Marymount, Shenandoah, and Penn State universities. He earned a PhD from The Ohio State University and co-authored with his wife, Catherine, a book on life in the foreign services, or in foreign service. He has also authored numerous books about the Civil War, sometimes focusing on Ohio figures and other times national figures. His book, Citizen General, focuses on Jacob Cox, Oberlin College graduate, son-in-law of Charles Grandison Finney, and a governor of Ohio. You can find information about this book and others on his website, and many of his books are available to download through Kindle on Amazon. Near the end of the program, I will be sharing a link to his website in the chat feature. Tonight's program will draw from a variety of books that he has recently authored that focus on 50 people at a time, including women, trailblazers and troublemakers, unsung heroes, political generals, and more. But I didn't want to give anything else away, and we'll now turn things over to Dr. Schmiel. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. And thanks, Liz, and thanks to the Oberlin Heritage Center for inviting me. I was supposed to come to speak 14 months ago when the pandemic hit, and so I'm glad to finally be able to do so. One of the positive things of the pandemic is that I had a lot more spare time. And you're looking at this page, one of the results of that spare time. I started writing books, 50 people at a time in certain categories about the Civil War. And I got to number 8 about a month ago. So I'm going to talk about the people in these books and the fact that had there been no Civil War, most of these people would remain unknown, but that they were the people who made the Civil War what it was and who changed America for good or ill. And each book has a 2-page article, pictures, and further reading about each person. And each article, I hope, will make you say, after reading it, I didn't know that. So here's the first person, which everybody knows about, Abraham Lincoln. Well, everybody knows about Abraham Lincoln. More books have been written about him than just about anybody except Jesus. But I wanted to mention the fact that he was by far the best political general of the Union. Now, when the Civil War started, the Union Army had 19,000 men. By the end of the war, it had 2 million men. So they had to hire a lot of people who were not professional soldiers. And many of them were very good generals, but no one had a better grasp of strategy than Abraham Lincoln. He understood, unlike some of his generals, that the objective was to destroy the enemy army, not reach its capital. And he was dominant in military decision-making. And his partnership with Ulysses Grant was probably one of the great keys to victory. And this is a painting of the final conference about a month before the war ended, where Grant, Sherman, and Admiral Porter are meeting with Lincoln. Lincoln's in the center. Lincoln's the man who's making the decisions. And the country bumpkin from Illinois, who arrived in Washington 4 years before that, and the statesman for this painting, really changed everything for the Civil War. Then we have another political general who was probably one of the worst of them all, a fellow named Ben Butler. Ben Butler was a backbench politician in Massachusetts, but when the war started, he wanted to become a general. Well, he did some very good things. He's the one who very critical of making sure that Maryland did not secede from the Union. There was a lot of support for secession in Maryland, but Butler sent troops and put that down. He's the one that created the idea of contrabands of war. If you don't know what this term is, early in the war, enslaved people were escaping into the Union lines, and their owners came to the Union Army and said, well, you have to give them back. And Ben Butler said, wait a minute, you're in rebellion, you're no longer in the Union, our laws don't apply to you anymore. These people are contrabands of war. They were going to work for the Union Army. And that was a key which eventually led to the Emancipation Proclamation. He was also in charge of New Orleans for about a year, and he cleaned up disease down there. But he is the most hated man in New Orleans to this day for this reason. The women of New Orleans were not treating the Union soldiers very well. Many of them were spitting at the Union soldiers. So Butler issued a proclamation. Any woman who mistreated a Union soldier would be considered a prostitute and be arrested. So they created the Ben Butler chamber pots. And this is one, and to this day, they are sold in New Orleans. And this is a picture of a toilet in 1863 in a house in Vicksburg. And there's old Ben Butler at the bottom. So not a popular fellow in the South. Here's another fellow, a real troublemaker, Judson Kilpatrick. He was a cavalry officer, and his nickname was Kill Cavalry. He was arrested twice during the war by his own men. He had a reputation for womanizing. He was very reckless in battle. But when Sherman started on his march to the sea, he picked Kilpatrick to be in charge of his cavalry. And he said, I know Kilpatrick's a hell of a damn fool, Well, I want just that sort of man to command my cavalry on this expedition. And he's most famous for his raid into Richmond in 1864. They went into Richmond. They were going to capture Jefferson Davis. They did not capture him, and they discovered documents on Kilpatrick's ally, Ulrich Dahlgren, that they wanted to assassinate Jefferson Davis. And some people say this was when the Confederacy decided that assassinating Lincoln would be part of their policy. We don't know. Here's a fellow who's very important, Thaddeus Lowe. Thaddeus Lowe came to Lincoln in 1861 and said, I have observation balloons. And these balloons will give the Union a great advantage because they can go up in the air and you can see what the Confederates are doing. And he did a demonstration on the White House lawn. He went up 500 feet in the air with a telegraph wire and sent a message to Lincoln. And it worked. But it only lasted for 2 years. And eventually the military stopped allowing Lowe to put up his observation balloons. And in the Confederate records, we read they were scratching their heads and saying, why in the world did the Union give up this incredible advantage? It's hard to believe what they did. And here's a book about Lowe. This reflects the reality. America's one-man Air Corps. He had to do it all himself. And it was a significant advantage given up by the Union. Here's another person, Confederate General Patrick Klebern. He was called the Stonewall of the West. He was one of the most forceful Confederate generals, but he was Irish. He emigrated to Arkansas and he joined the Confederacy. But he was never promoted to Army command because of the foreign birth, and he had very radical views about race. In 1864, he had a meeting of his generals, and he said, the North is signing up blacks to be in the Army. They're going to have hundreds of thousands of them. We're not going to have any. We should offer freedom to all of our enslaved people who want to become soldiers. The message was sent to Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis suppressed it, would not even talk about it. And so the Confederates threw away yet another advantage. And this is an image of Klebern. This is his last battle at the Battle of Franklin. If we are to die, let us die like men, charging towards the Union line at the Battle of Franklin, Tennessee. And those of you who have read my other book, the Union commander at the line was Jacob Cox of Oberlin. A few weeks ago, I went on a cruise. I was speaking on the cruise down in the low country of South Carolina. And I learned about this woman, Laura Town. Laura Town was a Philadelphia school teacher who went to Port Royal, which is an area near Hilton Head. The Union occupied this area early in the war, and she set up the Port Royal experiment. She and others set up schools for blacks, and the Union Army gave them land, gave them 40 acres. There was even a city created called Mitchellville, in which blacks had total control for themselves, total autonomy. And so Laura Town was one of the key people for that. And this is the book, if you want to read about that, called Rehearsal for Reconstruction. A very, very moving time, all thrown away because of Andrew Johnson, but there we are. What's interesting about is that this area near Port Royal was the home of secession. They were the most rabid secessionists. And in 2017, the Reconstruction era National Monument was created right there in Port Royal. So that's the interesting juxtaposition. The secessionists' home, now the museum, National Park Service Museum for Reconstruction, in the same area. Here's an interesting person, Stand Watie. He was the only Confederate general who was a Cherokee. He was a slave owner in Oklahoma, in the Oklahoma Territory. He joined the Confederacy because he thought he would lose his slaves if Republicans made Oklahoma a free state. He was the last Confederate commander to surrender out in the West. And he was a very highly respected chief. And after the war, he represented the Cherokee people for their post-war treaties. And I don't know when, but this is a United States postage stamp here. In 1995, a postage stamp was issued with Stand Watie on it, 32 cents. Then we have someone that everybody knows, Harriet Tubman, a legend. Probably the most famous escaped enslaved person of the Civil War. As she says here, I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. She rescued many. She acted as a spy. At one point, she even directed a Union attack. So she was played a military role in the Civil War in South Carolina. And Beaufort, South Carolina, the home of secession, is going to build it. They're going to build a statue to Harriet Tubman beginning next year. And Harriet Tubman will soon, I understand, will be on a $20 bill, replacing Andrew Jackson. Unlike many people, Harriet Tubman had 2 National Park Service facilities, the National Historical Park and the Underground Railroad Visitor Center, both up in Maryland, where she was from. Here's an interesting person you never heard about, George Sharp. George Sharp was a colonel in the Union Army. He was a lawyer, interesting, intelligent fellow. One day, General Joe Hooker told one of his aides, I really need better intelligence about the Confederate Army. And so his aide, his name was Marcina Patrick, was having a cup of coffee with George Sharp. And George Sharp said, maybe I could set something up, an intelligence network. He created a systematic network of spies and methods of collecting and analyzing intelligence so good that the CIA, in its official history, said, quote, his structured approach was not reinstitutionalized until 1947, when the CIA was created. So his system was so good, the CIA modeled its operations on what George Sharp did. And George Sharp had no background whatsoever about it. And this is the book, if anybody wants to read it, Major General George Sharp and the Creation of American Military Intelligence in the Civil War. This is Sharp over here. Then here's someone I think everybody knows about, who's a trailblazer, John Mercer Langston, activist. Oberlin graduate, 1849. Theology degree in 1852. The first Black man admitted to the Ohio bar, obviously played a critical role in the Underground Railroad. He created the Howard University Law School, ambassador to Haiti, and member of the U.S. Congress. So very, very well known in Oberlin, very distinguished record. And those of you who live in Oberlin know this is the John Mercer Langston House on College Street, which is on the National Trust Historic Houses. I forget the exact name, but those of you who want to visit, there it is. Then we have Lew Wallace. Now, most people have heard of Lew Wallace because he's the author of Ben-Hur. Most people don't know that Lew Wallace was a general in the Civil War. But he was not a good general. He was temperamental, and he was often critical of his bosses, the senior generals, which is fine, except he talked so loudly that his superiors heard about it, which did not make him really popular. At the Battle of Shiloh in April 1862, one of the most important battles in Tennessee, Wallace was ordered to come to Grant's support, and he got lost, and he never came to his support. And so Grant never liked the Wallace after that. At the Battle of Monocacy, this is in 1864, when the Confederates were on the verge of coming into the suburbs of Washington. Wallace was sent out to stop them, and this helped to save his reputation. Now, as you know, the Statuary Hall in the Congress was created during the Civil War. Each state is allowed to honor two people from their state. And Indiana chose Lew Wallace as one of their honorees. Believe me, it was not because of his Civil War record. It was because he wrote Ben-Hur. And Ben-Hur is a book which has never been out of print and still sells in the tens of thousands every year. So this is here's a picture. This is his statue in Statuary Hall in his general's uniform, and here's the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer blow up of the film. I think it was in the 50s. Charlton Heston and Jack Hawkins were starring in Ben-Hur. Now here's someone that I always like to feature in these talks, and that's Montgomery Migs, I call him the greatest unsung hero of all. Now, people know about George Marshall. George Marshall was a 5-star general. He was a Secretary of State. He was Secretary of Defense. George Marshall was one of the great heroes of World War II for the United States. George Marshall never went to a battlefield. George Marshall stayed in Washington the whole war. Montgomery Migs never went to a battlefield. He stayed in the War Department the entire war. So why is he a hero? Because he was the quartermaster general. He's the one that made sure the Union soldiers had 3 square meals a day, shoes, bullets, weapons, clothes, clothes and everything else so that they could have the war. And he set up logistics through the Union railroad system, through the canal system, telegraph system, etc. So he's the fellow behind the scenes that made it all work. He's also responsible. One day he was, as the thousands of wounded and dying men in the Civil War, he looked out from the White House with Lincoln, and when Lincoln said, we need a cemetery for all these men, he looked across the Potomac River and he said, I think Robert E. Lee's home would make a great cemetery. So Arlington Cemetery was created because of Montgomery Migs. And when they were first burying people, they were doing it hundreds of yards away from the house. Migs went to the house and said, no, I want you to bury them right here in front of the house in the Rose Garden. So Lee would never forget what he did. And after the war, Migs, who was an engineer and an architect, designed the pension building. This is one of the things that, about the growth of government, the government had lots of military pensions. He designed the pension building, which is here, which is now the National Building Museum. It's a magnificent structure inside. Look at these huge columns. This area is used for inaugural balls after presidential inaugurations. And this is in front of the building. You can see above where it says pension building. You can't see it too well, but this is a bas relief which goes all the way around the building of the common soldier performing various tasks, common Union soldier. So the building is a tribute to the Union soldiers by Montgomery Migs. Then we have one of the troublemakers, Andrew Johnson. This was Abraham Lincoln's worst decision, making Andrew Johnson his vice president. Andrew Johnson was a stubborn, well, let's be kind and call him adult. And once he made up his mind, he would not compromise. Lincoln wanted to have a moderate Reconstruction policy. Johnson implemented an easy Reconstruction policy. He made it known that if the South resisted, he was not going to do anything about it. If the Ku Klux Klan was busy, he didn't care. And he did everything he could to undercut a strong Reconstruction policy. And you remember I talked about Laura Town? All the formerly enslaved people had been given property rights. Andrew Johnson, one of the first things he did was reverse that decision. And he let all the former owners come back and take over their land that they had abandoned. Like I said, it's not a positive record. And as you know, Johnson was the very first president to be impeached. And my opinion is he should have been convicted and removed from office. He would have been replaced by a fellow named Ben Wade from Ohio, but it didn't happen. Here's one of the more positive people, Jonathan Letterman. He was a doctor. He was the father of battlefield medicine. Now, as you know, medical care in the United States and the rest of the world was pretty awful. And when the war started, there were really no preparations for the fact that this was going to be a continental war with millions of men fighting, 700,000 deaths, and a lot more wounded, ill from disease. And said again, more men died from disease than they died from wounds. But Letterman instituted several key reforms in the Army of the Potomac. He instituted triage. He created the first ambulance system. He created the first field hospitals. And he implemented the efficient control and supply of supplies. And this is where he cooperated with a person named Clara Barton. Clara Barton and Letterman were, especially at the Battle of Antietam, really played a critical role in modernizing the medicine and nursing and taking care of the troops. And so modern management of military hospitals got their start under Jonathan Letterman. This is a picture of a field hospital. Yeah, you can see it was people sitting here just waiting. People say, so medicine really improved in the Civil War. I said, yes, it did. It went from god awful to just awful. So that's an improvement. But people were still dying of disease even at the end of the war. And you all remember the story that when President Garfield of Ohio was shot, his doctor, this is in 1881, still refused to believe that putting his dirty finger into Garfield's body looking for the bullet would cause infection. So, and probably Garfield died from the infection, not from the bullet wound. Same thing was going on here. So things improved vastly, but they still were not that great. Here's someone who's an interesting character, Captain Sally Tompkins. She was a young woman living in Richmond, and early in the war, the Confederate wounded were being shipped back to Richmond, and a local man named Mr. Robertson opened up his very large house and was created as a hospital. And she became the administrator of the hospital. And Jefferson Davis announced that well, if it's a military hospital, only someone in the military can administer it. So he made Sally Tompkins a captain in the Confederate Army. She's the only woman who got a military title in the Confederate Army. She didn't do any fighting. But she administered this hospital, which had the lowest mortality rate of any Confederate hospital. And here's a book about her life. This is an interesting thing. I have two pictures here about how they paid a tribute to her. There's a church in Richmond, an Episcopal church, which has several stained glass windows honoring, this is a picture of the hospital where she was, and the image of the stained glass of Jesus thanking Sally for her work in taking care of the wounded. This picture looks a little strange. Well, it has a background. In 1965, the 100th anniversary of the Civil War, there were some people in Richmond who said, you know, we should have a statue honoring Sally Tompkins because of the wonderful things that she did. And so they had a competition for designs for the statue. Now you'll see this statue. This is supposed to be Sally slaying a dragon. And this is, believe it or not, is a finger. The statue up top is suspended on top of a finger. Now you may or may not understand that the designer of this model for a statue was Salvador Dali. Salvador Dali has some very strange ideas of art, and this was one of his strangest. And this was not accepted. So Sally never got a statue. But if they did, it certainly would be interesting. It's just suspended on Salvador Dali's finger. Here's an interesting fellow. One of the great heroes behind the scenes was Thomas Nast. Thomas Nast was a German immigrant, and he went to work for Harper's Weekly. And Harper's Weekly was by far one of the most influential newspapers. And Nast became the first and most influential political cartoonist in military history. It was a key news source and key support for the Union. Lincoln said Nast was probably his best recruiter for the Union troops. And Thomas Nast invented Santa Claus. Well, he invented the image of Santa Claus. Here's a couple of his drawings. This is probably his best known. This is an image of here's the woman at home praying for her man who's on duty in the family home. There's their children sleeping. And here's the man on duty reading a letter. He probably has a scarf of his wife thinking about home. It's sentimental Christmas Eve. And here's the image of Santa Claus over here talking to the troops. Again, Harper's Weekly. Here's an interesting person, Katie Brownell. Now, you remember I said Sally Tompkins got a military rank? Well, Katie Brownell got a military rank too, but for the Union Army. She and her husband joined early in the war under Ambrose Burnside, and she was given the role as the color bearer. Now, those of you who have been in the military know that a color bearer is not sit in the back of the troops. The color bearer is out front. The color bearer waves the flag so the men know where to go on the battlefield. This is a dangerous position. And she designed her own uniform. This is her uniform. And she led the troops forward during the first battle of Manassas. She and her husband only stayed in the military for 6 months, but in the end, she received a military pension, not a nurse's pension, a military pension. And she was and her membership in the Grand Army of the Republic, a veterans organization. So there are 400 women who fought for the Union, many of them in disguise, most of them in disguise. Katie Brownell is one of the few who did not fight in disguise. She fought as a woman. And this is the map of the Battle of First Manassas up here, and this is where she was. and a critical point at the red arrow. So under Ambrose Burnside. Then we have Gabriel Reigns. Here's what the bad bomber of the Confederacy. This guy was a West Pointer. From an early age, he liked to blow things up. He developed landmines, torpedo mines, and lots of others. He was one of the critical people for the success of the Confederacy because he blew up an awful lot of Union men and ships and buildings. So 2,000 mines detonated during the war because of Gabriel Reigns. And you remember I talked about the Kilpatrick Dahlgren raid? One of the things that they did after that, they gave orders to Reigns to develop a bomb to blow up the White House in 1865, but it wasn't used. And so luckily it wasn't. And just to show you something about reconciliation, after the war, Reigns worked for the Ordnance Department of the American Army after the war. So all was forgiven. This is an interesting sign. When Sherman was marching through Georgia, his men were having trouble they were marching through fields with landmines. Well, he had Confederate prisoners. And he decided, well, the solution is to find out where the mines were. He sent the Confederate prisoners marching ahead of his men so they would find the mines by blowing themselves up. Or he sent a message to the Confederates, tell me where the mines are and I won't blow your men up. And that's what this talks about. And the Confederate men, they're the ones that had to go in and remove the unexploded mines. So Sherman was a tough nut, but he was from Ohio, so what do you expect? Here's someone we all know about, Jacob Cox, one of the best political generals. Again, at Oberlin, he was a theology student, but he fought in the Union Army for 4 years. At the end of the war, Sherman offered him a generalship in the regular army. His book, Military Reminiscences of the Civil War, was the most cogent argument for an open military system, one in which people from ROTC, from the civilian sector, from West Point, or anyone else could rise to the top of the military. And one of the great examples is Colin Powell. Colin Powell did not go to West Point. Colin Powell was in ROTC and rose up through the system. And this is my book, Citizen General, for those of you who want to look into that. I highly recommend it. Here's someone like Reigns, William Quantrill. I'm sorry to say also was born in Ohio and one of the great barbarians of the Civil War. He went to Missouri and he became I think of no better term than a nihilist. He joined the Confederacy. He formed Quantrill's Raiders, bushwhackers. There were people who essentially went around killing anybody and everybody. And two of his deputies were named Frank James and Jesse James. So you know the kind of people that he worked with. And in the middle of the war, he went to Lawrence, Kansas. Lawrence, Kansas was an abolitionist center, was a center of the Underground Railroad, and Quantrill sent his men in saying, kill all the men, burn down all the buildings, and do what you want with the women and children. Yes, he was that kind of guy. And this is a drawing from that period from Frank Leslie's weekly of Quantrill's raid. Now today there is what's called the Quantrill Society in Missouri. They meet every year to celebrate, and that's the word they use, celebrate Quantrill. So I don't get it, but there you are. Joshua Chamberlain, everybody knows Joshua Chamberlain, one of the great political generals. Actually, he wasn't. He did very little. You've heard about what he did at Gettysburg. saved the day for the Union. Actually, he didn't. He was helpful. He wrote in his memoirs that he received the soldiers' arms when the Confederates were surrendering at Appomattox. Not true. So he included lots of exaggerations. I compare him with Jacob Cox. In Joshua Chamberlain's memoirs, the word I appears about every other sentence. In Jacob Cox's memoirs, he rarely uses the word I. That's why people know who Joshua Chamberlain is, but they don't know who Jacob Cox is. But there we are. This is a book which you want to read about. It's fiction. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It's very entertaining. It's not very accurate, but it's a very entertaining book, The Killer Angels, about the Battle of Gettysburg, which made Joshua Chamberlain a hero. And here's Elizabeth Blackwell. Elizabeth Blackwell, a pioneer doctor. She was the first woman in the United States to get a medical degree. She's the one that came up with the idea for the Sanitary Commission. Again, the Army had no way to supply bandages and crutches and anything else for the Army. The U.S. Sanitary Commission, which was a private organization, supplied almost all of it for the Union Army. And Elizabeth Blackwell was the one who created the idea. And after the Civil War, she created medical schools only for women. The women couldn't get into medical schools, so she created medical schools only for women. And she worked with someone we all know, Florence Nightingale, over in England too. And like so many people, she got a postage stamp after her. 18th century, I don't know when this one was issued, but as it says here, the first woman physician in the United States. Here's an interesting character most people don't know about, William Slade. Slade was the chief usher at the White House for many years before the Civil War, for many years after the Civil War. And he was very, very influential to push Lincoln towards accepting abolition, towards the Emancipation Proclamation, Black equality, and Black troops. And Lincoln used him as a sounding board. He used him as a messenger. He said, William, what do you think about these issues? And Slade was the one who arranged for Frederick Douglass to meet with Lincoln twice. And this is a painting of one of Douglass's meetings with Lincoln in the White House. Also in the White House was a fellow named John Hay. Now, those of you from Cleveland know about John Hay High School. Well, John Hay wasn't from Ohio, but eventually he moved to Ohio. And when the Civil War started, he was a 23-year-old man, and a fellow named John Nicolay was 25. The two of them were the entire White House staff for most of the war. Considering how large the government is today, it was quite something. So they lived in the White House, they worked in the White House, and they're the ones who essentially wrote all of Lincoln's messages, ran his errands, and did a tremendous job. And he eventually became Secretary of State under William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt. And he and Nicolay wrote a 10-volume biography of Lincoln, which is the key source for the memory of Lincoln. And again, a book, if you want to read, a very, very interesting book about Hay, Nicolay, and the war for Lincoln's image and how they ran the White House. The final person I'm going to talk about is Dan Sickles. Now, Dan Sickles was the number one troublemaker. No one made more trouble than this guy. This guy was corrupt to the core. He got into politics in the 1840s. He accepted any bribe he got. He married a young woman at 16 whom he got to first know when she was 3 years old. Eventually waited until she was 16 and got married. He wasn't very attentive to her. He had lots of girlfriends. So the wife had an affair. And the affair was with the son of Francis Scott Key. Francis Scott Key was the writer of the Star Spangled Banner, and Sickles learned about it, and Sickles, and here's the picture of it, Sickles killed Key's son in cold blood in the streets of Washington, and he got away with it. This was the first case where a person was declared innocent because of temporary insanity, because of his anger at his wife having an affair. Now, of course, Sickles had 6 or 7 affairs at the same time, but you don't talk about that. Now, during the war, his main claim to fame is that at the Battle of Gettysburg, he disobeyed orders and nearly lost the battle. Here's the picture of that. He was told to hold this line here, right in the center, but instead, you can see he went up forward of the line. It allowed himself to be encircled by the Confederates. He lost his leg at this part of the battle, and the Confederates nearly swept the Union from the field. Sickles made an incredible mistake, and would you believe it? He got the Medal of Honor, and there's a Sickles Avenue on the Gettysburg battlefield. So I don't get it, but there you are. So those are the individuals I wanted to talk about. But in the book, I got to 49 people. And I said, I want to talk about other trailblazers, not individuals, but people who trailed blazes during the Civil War that never would have happened without the war. And here they are. Number 1, nurses. When the war started, all nurses in the Union Army were men. By the end of the war, there were 4,000 women who were nurses, 800 of whom were nuns. At the start of this, in 1861, there were 25 teaching hospitals run by nuns. So when the war started, there was a coterie of nurses ready to go. And they did great service in the war. But of course, there were thousands of other women, and modern American nursing was founded during the Civil War. Now, I always have to say at this point that Clara Barton always said that she was not a nurse. She supplied goods for nurses. So Clara Barton was not the first great American nurse, but she obviously was extremely important. So nursing and nursing nuns. Here's some people who were very important behind the scenes. Telegraphers and signal corpsmen. The Civil War was the first war where generals in the field could send messages to each other, back to headquarters, from headquarters. It could communicate within hours using telegraph, using Morse code. And they had to do it with these guys, all with lines being run mile after mile after mile. Again, it wasn't in the air, it was through lines. And that's what these guys did. You don't hear much about them, but there was a real revolution in communication because of them. And then these guys sending the signals, also getting up high. Again, when the observation balloons weren't being used, these guys with their binoculars were able to send signals to generals also. So they were very, very important. The bands and the drummer boys. Whenever a battle was about to begin, the bands would begin to play to get the soldiers charged up. Now, they always stayed in the back. They frequently were used as ambulance and to carry away the wounded. This is at Lookout Mountain just outside Chattanooga. In the winter, here's these guys playing. They're standing on snow on the edge of this cliff. I don't know about you. I don't think I would have any part of this, but there you are. And here's a picture of some of the drummer boys. Some of them as young as 9 years old. They were frequently used to send signals. to the troops as to what the action they should be taking. Drovers. Drovers were the guys who sometimes 5, 6, 8 miles behind the armies were vast herds of cattle. And when they, especially more for the Union than the Southern, when they wanted a good meal of beef, these guys made sure that the beef were there and ready. This woman, her name is Marie Tepe. They were called vivandières. This is a French term. These were people who kind of an all-purpose daughters of the regiment, they were called. They would do laundry. They would sell sundries. They would act as nurses when needed. They would find supplies. And Marie here, she wrote in her memoirs that the most important thing she did was take care of the whiskey supply. And you see under her arm here is the whiskey jug. And she's got a good hold on that. Finally, other trailblazer, chaplains. This was the first war when hundreds of chaplains were hired behind the lines, and cooks. And this is one of the jobs that the formerly enslaved people were given frequently. They were brought in as cooks. Many of them had been cooking in the South. Well, they became cooks for the Union Army. So these are people behind the scenes. They're trailblazers too. We don't hear much about them. I wanted to mention them too. So those are trailblazers and troublemakers. And these are my books from my series. And I wanted to thank you. That's the end of my talk, and I appreciate it very much. And I hope there are some good questions.
I give you a round of applause on behalf of everyone in the audience here tonight. And I will share just a few messages. So those of you with questions, please do enter those into the Q&A box, and we will relay those on. We did have a question come in during the program about whether this recording will be available. They said this is great information. You know, they were worried about whether they should be taking notes. So in the audience, this is being recorded, and after a little bit of light editing of the technical parts, we do send the link, the recording link, out to all people who are registered for this program. So you can watch for that in the future. And while we're waiting for questions too, I will put in the chat box. That link should get you to Dr. Schmiel's website with some of his books, so you can check that out. So hopefully people are typing a few questions. Nothing has come in yet. And usually in a program, this is when I would ask, like, if you had more time, who would you do? But I know you have done, it seems like hundreds of people over the last few months. But do you still feel people you haven't gotten to yet?
Well, it's to say, these are 400 people, although I did repeat some. I mean, some people like Jacob Cox is a political general, but he's also a prominent Civil War Ohioan. Additional people that people don't know about. Let's see here. Oh, what happened? Oh, there it is. Let's see. Well, who am I going to talk about here? Well, like I said, I mentioned Clara Barden up here. She's certainly a trailblazer, but she was very, as I said, very adamant about saying, please do not call me a nurse. I'm in charge of supplies. But her major contribution after the war was she created this office of missing soldiers. There were thousands of men who had been essentially buried where they fell. There were no name tags, there were no dog tags, there was nothing. And she had people write to her, and they investigated, and they found something like 2,100 bodies that were able to be reinterred by the families. So I think that was a long-term contribution that she made. Let's see here. Well, we got James Garfield over there. We got
Well, while you're thinking, we did get a question come in.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it was referenced in general or to your last response. It says, were the dead buried along the trail or taken somewhere?
Oh, they were buried where they fell. I mean, again, nobody was prepared for anything. Nobody was prepared for a mass continental war with millions of men. The thousands of men dying, thousands of men being wounded, and they just were left where they were frequently. Just about a year and a half ago, a farmer, I lived near the Manassas battlefield. A farmer was tilling his soil and ran across, found some bones, right, which was where the battlefield was. So they're still being found. It's again, tens of thousands were missing. And yeah, towards the end of the war, they got much better at it. But again, for instance, at Antietam, 23,000 casualties, which included about 8,000 dead, and then the armies moved away. Well, they left it up to the local people. Gettysburg, thousands of the local farmers had to pick up and do what they could. And what could they do? They just created mass graves. It was abominable. So.
We did get two other comments come in. One was from Deb Moeller. Thank you for your talk and sharing these interesting characters. And then a request from Jack Sender. Can you speak of Asa Parker's friend from Erie County, Ohio, Reverend Samuel Marks?
No, because I don't know. Maybe that person can tell me. I don't know that name.
All right. We should remind people that you are coming to us from the Washington, D.C. area, but
well, born and raised in Klebern, but that doesn't necessarily mean I know everybody from Ohio.
Our apologies to Mr. Sender, but we'll have to do some research. It seems like people are just absorbing everything you say, so not too many other questions, but I'm going to squeeze in another question.
Okay.
So if you had the chance to meet any one of the people you read about, I'm not sure what, you have a favorite, or maybe not a favorite, just someone you'd like to meet. Maybe it's just to ask a key question.
Well, probably all of them. Obviously, Jacob Cox is first, since he and I have been friends since 1969, when I first got to Oberlin to do my research in Bosworth Hall in the basement, which is where the Oberlin archives were. So, as I said, Jacob Cox wrote a lot of books, and he was very self-effacing, didn't blow his own horn. He said history would take care of me. Well, Gene Schmiel made him well known. So he would be probably the first. But probably Lincoln, right here in the middle. It's such an interesting character. You talk about the title of my book, Civil War Women, Underestimated and Indispensable. We talk about being underestimated. When Lincoln came to Washington, his entire cabinet, each one of them thought they were going to be the real president, that Lincoln was this bumpkin who could be bowled over and told what to do. He just overshadowed all of them. So, no, I think it would have to be Lincoln. Just an amazing character. And so.
All right. Well, I didn't see any more comments come in, so I just wanted to thank you one last time for sharing your time and your expertise with us and bringing more of this history to light, including, as you said, unsung heroes and others that all add to the historic fabric. So thank you so much, and thank you to all the attendees with us here tonight.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you all.